Erwin Rommel was never in top command anywhere he fought, yet his superiors are all but forgotten. For it was Rommel that the Allies feared and his troops cheered.
He had what the Germans call Fingerspitzengefühl, which is a sixth sense of sizing up a situation.
He came to personify armored blitzkrieg that knifed through bewildered enemies, whatever their numbers. A man who could turn the tide of a hopeless battle in one insanely daring stroke.
Of course, I was proud of him. I still respect him very much.
Rommel is probably best understood as a character from another century.
Rommel was a very honorable and principled man. He would never obey an unsoldierly order, even though it came from Hitler.
He's got that genius ability like a chess master has. He can face off maybe 12 guys and play them to a standstill at one time.
It was Rommel who would cause the redoubtable Winston Churchill to cry out to the House of Commons, "What else matters but beating him?" On November 15, 1891, Erwin Johannes Eugen Rommel was born in Württemberg, Germany, the son of the dour, frugal schoolmaster Erwin Rommel and his wife, the former Helene von Lutz, both devout Protestants. Young Erwin would grow up with an older sister and two younger brothers in a family that had no military tradition. His father was attentive, if not warm.
In his early life, he was a frail, docile child, but as he grew into his teens, he developed into a gymnast and an athlete and showed signs of leadership at that age already. He was a courageous boy, and the others gravitated around him.
The Germany of the early 20th century was still glorying in its humiliation of the French in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. A prestigious officer corps heavy with Prussian nobility dominated a powerful army fed by conscription. Still, the need for officers from the middle classes was great enough for schoolmaster Rommel to urge his son to service, and young Erwin joined the Württemberg Infantry Regiment in July 1910. He served a mandatory stint in the ranks and passed to the military academy in Danzig.
He was a cadet who didn't sow any wild oats. He drank only an occasional glass of wine. He didn't smoke. And those habits continued with him for the rest of his life.
While he was a cadet at the military academy, he met Lucy Maria Merlin, daughter of a well-to-do family. She was drawn to Rommel's easygoing humor, so rare in a military man. By 1912, Rommel was a second lieutenant. With no openings in his first choices, artillery and engineers, he joined the infantry. Germany and most of Europe plunged into World War I in August 1914. Young Rommel found his first reputation in battle. As his battalion lost a quarter of its officers, he was constantly in motion at the front, probing for soft spots to go through and around the French. He didn't hesitate to take control of other platoon commanders' troops when he needed to keep up the attack. His courage was phenomenal.
He was leading two platoons in a counterattack, And during that counterattack, he ran into a group of Frenchmen. He fired, and two Frenchmen, one behind the other, were brought down by that shot. But when he went to fire at the others, his gun was empty. He charged them. Unfortunately for him, the French beat him to it and shot him, shattering his thigh.
He drove himself to recovery, and his legend as an unkillable fox of the battlefield began. He won his first Iron Cross and deep respect. A platoon leader wrote of him, in some curious way, his spirit permeated the entire regiment right from the start. Everybody was inspired by his initiative, his courage, his dazzling acts of gallantry. Anyone who once came under the spell of his personality turned into a real soldier. He seemed inexhaustible. He seemed to know what the enemy were like and how they would probably react. His plans were often startling, instinctive, spontaneous, and not infrequently obscure. His men idolized him and had boundless faith in him. After being promoted in 1916, he joyfully returned home on leave to marry his sweetheart, Lucy Maria Merlin. She would be the love of his life to its end. Rommel's capstone achievement in World War I came commanding a battalion on the Italian front at Mount Matajur during the Caporetto offensive of 1917.
He sought the soft spots, the unguarded post, the position that where there was no continuous trench line.
Although he was only a first lieutenant, his tactics so impressed higher commanders that he was given a battle group of battalion size, normally led by a major or even a lieutenant colonel. Rommel succeeded in storming Mount Matajur and decimating 5 Italian regiments, taking 9,000 prisoners. He had lost only 6 dead from his force, one dying of exhaustion trying to keep up with Lieutenant Rommel. For his feats, he won the Pour le Mérite, the Blue Max, Germany's highest award for bravery, and was promoted to captain.
One of his contemporaries said that you will never understand Rommel until you understand what he did at Mount Matajur. He will always be that lieutenant on the way to that hill, making snap decisions.
But those lessons of combat would have to wait for another war. Germany collapsed, and Rommel would not command in another battle for over 20 years. Chaos came to the streets of a conquered Germany. The Imperial Army was dissolved, to be replaced under the peace treaty by the Reichswehr, a tiny 100,000-man army denied all modern equipment. It was to put down mutinies and maintain order, and no more. Erwin Rommel was one of the tiny elite officer corps of barely 4,000 men. Briefly, life was tranquil for the Rommels. A much-loved son, Manfred, was born in 1928. Rommel won appointment as instructor to the infantry school in 1929 and a promotion to major in 1932 at the age of 40. By 1933, he was a lieutenant colonel.
My father was a very modern father. This means he was rather tolerant and liberal for his profession and for his time.
But the man who would use the rebuilding German army as the tool to shatter an entire world was soon stalking to the leadership of a bellicose Germany. And Adolf Hitler would notice a book, one written by a young officer named Rommel.
He had time to write a book, The Infantry Attacked. It was a compendium of infantry tactics and actually was so highly thought of that the Swiss Army adopted it as a text. Hitler happened to read this book and was so impressed by it that he was appointed as commandant of Hitler's headquarters.
The army had been taught to be not political. This was a very good principle in the democracy, but a very bad principle in the time of Hitler, because many soldiers said, I do my duty. Politics is not my business.
This partnership of knight and monster would be as intense and explosive as the German attack that blasted into Poland on September 1st, 1939, to begin World War II. In September of 1939, Rommel was a major general, watching the German Wehrmacht tear through a hapless Poland in 3 weeks. As commandant of the Führer's headquarters, he took no part in the fighting and fell under Hitler's reptilian charm, saying, "The Führer knows exactly what is good for us."
While Rommel was at Hitler's headquarters, he became a great admirer of Hitler. The two men had both been infantry soldiers in World War I, and there was an affinity.
Rommel saw the huge assault on France forming, and he saw that the new armored weapon would be at the spearhead, right where he wanted to be. He begged Hitler for field command of a panzer division. Over opposition, Hitler agreed.
Hitler wanted to champion this officer that he respected so much by giving him the command of a panzer division. Here's an infantryman who had absolutely no experience in tanks, given one of the elite panzer divisions. Rommel's invasion of France, his piece in the German invasion of France as the commander of the 7th Panzer Division, was almost precisely what he had done as a lieutenant in France, in Romania, and in Italy during World War I. He sought the soft spot. He looked for the unprotected flank. In many cases, he was directing the efforts of a single tank up front. His staff quite often simply lost contact with him, but it was blitzkrieg in its purest form. It was Rommel.
Exhilarated and invincible, Rommel exulted in outracing the other panzer groups. There were no reins, only the whip and spur. Slashing into the French rear and communications, he saw shock and the momentum of advance as the keys to paralysis of the enemy will. Ignoring minor shrapnel wounds, he maintained the pressure day and night. The mercurial 7th Panzer became known as the Ghost Division, and the verb to Rommel came into use to describe a crushing armored attack.
Rommel's 7th Panzer Division was among the lead, breaking for the French coast. He paid no regard to his flanks, sure of the confusion that the German onslaught had wrought among the French enemy.
Rommel's division broke through the French-Belgian border, forced the crossing over the Meuse River, and raced on to the Channel ports. And in the process, he completely decimated 2 French divisions, took hordes of prisoners, and drove on to Cherbourg. Rommel had advanced 175 miles in 10 days, crossed the Meuse, captured 10,000, destroyed 100 tanks, and would lose barely 2,000 men in the whole campaign. As the British were pushed into the sea at Dunkirk to end the French campaign, Rommel was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. He had won Germany's highest military award in 2 world wars. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had found the perfect hero to exploit to the German people.
Rommel is an exotic figure, a classic military-looking figure with steady, piercing blue eyes and a square jaw. He looks like the quintessential soldier.
The Nazi leadership had just the showcase for the new superhero, North Africa. Now a lieutenant general, Rommel was ordered by Hitler to go to the assistance of Germany's Italian allies before they were pushed off the continent. Such a defeat would eliminate the Axis threat against the Suez Canal and British oil supplies. Rommel arrived on February 12, 1941, to take command of 2 German divisions organized into what was called the German Africa Corps. It was a name that would strike terror into Allied hearts for 2 flaming years. The 100,000 British troops under General Wavell had been dealing with the 250,000 Italians handily, rolling them up along the Libyan coast while capturing the important supply port of Tobruk. Rommel was ordered to stabilize the situation.
His mission order from Halder and OKH and OKW, the German High Command, is essentially to just stave off Italian defeat for the moment. He's not to try to conquer North Africa or anything. He's permitted to do perhaps an aggressive defense, but no more than that.
Knowing the British had weakened their African army by reinforcing their forces in Greece, he conveniently forgot his orders and ripped into the British with the customary Rommel zest. In just over 2 weeks, he had mostly thrown the British out of Libya and captured their best field general, Richard O'Connor. The reeling British reinforced their desert army until the Africa Corps was outnumbered nearly 3 to 1. But Rommel still ran rings around his enemy as the fighting seesawed east and west across the desert. Rommel's fearsome reputation was as great a weapon as his panzers. The British again and again held back from pressing their advantage in fear of a nasty Rommel surprise. He said, "It is given to me to feel where the enemy is weak." To awed fellow officers, he was known as the schoolmaster.
What Rommel managed to forge into a single cohesive weapon were his tanks, his infantry, but above all, his anti-tank weapons, his 88mm anti-aircraft guns.
Time and again, he won battles by drawing British armor onto a screen of 88mm anti-aircraft guns, whose barrels were depressed to knock out British armor.
He is a soldier's soldier. He's happiest when he's in command of those kinds of forces. He is oblivious to hardship, doesn't care about eating good food or good wine or resting and so forth. He's happy when he's pushing those forces across the ground.
I'll never forgot that the battles weren't won by the staff officer in the polished boots and with his bed and his duplicating machine. It was won by the dirty soldier who had lice and diarrhea and was sweaty and cold and homesick.
Rommel became obsessed with a very important seaport, Tobruk. On his first encounter with that place, it had been denied to him by a stout British defense, and it had become a real British symbol of British resolve against all odds.
Rommel would crush that resolve with guile and dash. In a second bloody siege, he took Tobruk.
It is a bitter blow for the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Churchill says things like, defeat in warfare is one thing, but humiliation is quite another. The odds against him are so great, his initial successes are so fabulous, he essentially can write his own ticket.
An elated Hitler made Rommel a field marshal. Sent to fight a holding action, Rommel now stood before El Alamein, the gateway to Cairo and Suez, on the point of driving the British out of Egypt. Rommel hardly noticed that the frustrated Churchill had sent the very antithesis of the Desert Fox to command the British Eighth Army in Africa. General Bernard Montgomery was as coldly methodical as Rommel was hotly intuitive. Montgomery began systematically to assemble an overwhelming material superiority that even Rommel could not defeat. The RAF began to dominate the sky, and the Royal Navy the Mediterranean. The Nazi tide was ebbing, but keeping Rommel out of El Alamein would take one of the world's epic battles. Rommel's Desert War reached its climax in the long battles for El Alamein and an open road to Suez. Beginning in October 1942, Rommel had little chance to prevail over Montgomery. The British had set up a head-on battle with no room to maneuver. It was a fight that would trade men and tanks, one for one. And Rommel's thin forces would run dry first.
He was at a definite disadvantage at the end of a long supply line and running extremely low on munitions and gasoline for his mobile elements. By the 2nd of November, it was clear in his own mind that he had no chance to prevail, and retreat was already part of his plan. Rommel's faith in Hitler, and certainly his earlier admiration for the man, was shaken considerably at the last stage of the Battle of El Alamein. On November 3rd, Hitler radioed an order to Rommel directly to stand fast and fight to the last bullet. An order he was fond of giving, especially in the later stages of the war.
Though he considered the order suicidal, Rommel held for 5 furious days, before moving to save his army with a brilliant retreat that began on November 4th. But Rommel was wearing down physically. But even a sick Rommel was a feared and lethal foe, even with just 35 tanks left. British victories seemed temporary, and Rommel victories inevitable. The words "Rommel leading" always produced a chill. A letter to British commanders warned that there was a real danger that our friend Rommel is becoming a kind of magician or bogeyman to our troops, who are talking far too much about him. Yet they couldn't hate him. His decency was too well known. When he was attacking El Alamein, one part of the British defense was a brigade of Jewish soldiers, and Hitler learned of that and ordered Rommel to execute them when they were captured. And once again, Rommel simply tore up the order. A month after the Battle of El Alamein had ended, a heavy Anglo-American North African landing in the west threatened Rommel from behind. It would squeeze in between the forces of Montgomery and the American General Eisenhower. But smoothly and swiftly, Rommel staged a fighting retreat into a strong defensive pocket at Tunisia, with the sea at his back.
They're in no way trying to give up. They are trying to figure out a way to deliver knockout blows, particularly to the Americans, whom they know to be fairly inexperienced. Rommel has worked out the way in which he wants to move into these very critical passes in the mountain chain that runs north and south up through the Tunisian area, in order to break out and essentially disrupt the American and British command system.
The Battle of Kasserine Pass and around Sidi Bouzid was classic Rommel, the apparently bloodied, fleeing desert fox turning to sink his teeth into an overconfident pursuer.
The fighting before and at Kasserine Pass in the middle of February 1943 is significant from the American perspective because it's almost a disaster. A little over 100 tanks lost. The 168th Infantry Regiment has significant troops lost as casualties, including a large number of prisoners that are taken at that point as the German armored forces are rolling west. Business trying to figure out how to get in front of this juggernaut. And that point, he is told, no, we have this problem down on the Mareth line. So at the culminating point, having victoriously pushed the Americans back, seized the pass, they stop and are withdrawn.
By now, the armored strength of the poorly resupplied Afrika Korps was dropping dramatically, and Rommel without tanks was not truly Rommel. In March of 1943, drained and sick, he was withdrawn to Germany from Tunisia. He would never see Africa again. The Afrika Korps surrender in May 1943 broke his heart. His classic command had lasted just 2 years and never exceeded 5 divisions in creating its havoc. And now, back from desert isolation, Rommel would confront disturbing realities. After his return from North Africa, he became agonizingly aware of the crimes of the Hitler regime. His old friend General von Blaskowitz asked him, "Rommel, do you know why I'm not a field marshal?" And then grimly answered his own question, saying, "I would not countenance what the SS did in Poland and Russia." A horrified Rommel was finding out that he served not just a failing war, but a criminal enterprise. Rommel became increasingly disillusioned and soon became part of a widespread conspiracy to do away with Hitler. Ever correct, he felt Hitler should not be killed, but arrested and tried in the courts. But when Hitler put him in charge of building a mighty Atlantic wall to throw a building Allied invasion force back into the English Channel, all other considerations were put aside. For this supreme soldier, the plans of war far overshadowed those of political intrigue. Yet it was the political plans that would prove fatal to Erwin Rommel. Through the first half of 1944, the Allies were building the most formidable assault machine ever assembled, all of it to crush Rommel's Atlantic Wall defenses. Their equipment was factory new and in boundless supply. They dominated the air and the sea. But if Rommel could stop them at the beaches, it would invite the negotiated peace he wanted. Only a Rommel would not have trembled at the challenge. There were 1,616 miles of beach to defend, from Holland to southern France. That meant only one understrength German division to defend every 28 miles. And he no longer had the freedom of a desert. Rommel, the master of mobile warfare in North Africa, found himself compelled to fight a static, defensive war to protect the Normandy coastlines. Hitler and Rommel needed each other, and they renewed bonds strained by the North African defeat. Of Hitler's ability to weave an optimistic spell, Rommel said wryly to a friend, "I am here for a sunray cure. I am soaking up sun and faith." He was awarded the Swords and Diamonds of the Knight's Cross and knew he had won back Hitler's support. Because his forces were so thin for the long coast he must defend, Rommel, the offensive genius, had to turn to fixed defenses. Millions of mines, thousands of miles of barbed wire, and glider-smashing stakes known as Rommel asparagus went into place. But the Desert Fox was now chained down to measureless tons of concrete, poured into miles of bristling gun emplacements and pillboxes. These were the kinds of positions he had always thought of as coffins for soldiers. The one bright spot in his life was his family. Though he could see them only seldom over the war years, he produced an incredible flow of letters to Lucy. Rommel was at home visiting Lucy on her birthday, June 6th, when he heard that the Allied avalanche had fallen upon Normandy. He rushed back to the new fighting front. Now Rommel found he had run out of time. His dream of parallel minefields miles wide and 4 belts of underwater obstacles was too far from realization. The Allies were held up at the beaches for less than a day before they punched through to establish a beachhead. Rommel raged in frustration. Somehow, Rommel held the Allies in place and bogged them down as 2 million men contested the hedgerows of Normandy. But the inevitable German defeat was now clear to Rommel. The brave and charismatic Colonel Graf Schenk von Stauffenberg and General Hans Speidel were the highly placed leaders of a long-running complex plot to remove Hitler. Several attempts to kill the Führer had failed.
There was some disagreement as to what Rommel's function would be, whether he would be taking over the army or whether he would be president of the new Germany.
He didn't think to make any political career. He only acted out of the responsibility he felt as a general.
Field Marshal von Kluge replaced von Rundstedt over Rommel, who now talked recklessly of opening the Western Front to the Allies when they achieved the inevitable breakthrough and ended the last hope. He would present Hitler with a fait accompli. He thought it critical for the Allies to reach Berlin before the Russians. Making one more effort at reason, Rommel met with Hitler at Berchtesgaden to make one more attempt to have him end hostilities.
Hitler coldly insisted that Rommel leave the room. This was at the end of June 1944, and Rommel never came into Hitler's presence again.
After Rommel's meeting with Hitler, he and his chief of staff returned and composed a message, basically an ultimatum. This ultimatum told Hitler that it was time to bring the war to a close, that Germany could in no way win it anymore. He sent the message via von Kluge's headquarters, and von Kluge endorsed it with, "I agree with Rommel."
Rommel would not get his answer.
At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the 17th of July, he was proceeding back to the chateau near a town called Livarot when British aircraft caught him on the road. He yelled to his driver to speed up and take a turnoff that was coming up. But the aircraft in low attack caught the staff car on the open road.
A critically injured Rommel would survive, but it would be no mercy. On Thursday, July 20th, 1944, as Rommel lay grievously wounded by a strafing fighter, a shattering explosion wrecked a headquarters hut in Rastenburg, East Prussia, where a high-level meeting was in progress. The last second movement of a briefcase bomb to behind a heavy table leg saved the life of Adolf Hitler. The blast set the assassination plotters into premature and disastrous motion, setting off a chain reaction of arrests, torture, kangaroo courts, and cruel summary executions. Ironically, a doomed Erwin Rommel was winning a temporary reprieve from death from his wounds. But by now, Rommel's name had been mentioned by conspirators who had been tortured by the SS after the failure of the bomb plot. Hitler himself resolved that Rommel had to be eliminated, but in a way that would not cause embarrassment to the state or its Führer. Von Stauffenberg already had been executed, but it would never do to have Rommel dragged through the humiliations of the public mock trials that were condemning other plotters. Rommel had for long been the most popular figure in Germany after Hitler himself. Hitler dared not accuse his most heroic general of involvement in treason for fear of crushing national morale.
On the 14th of October, 2 generals came from the Supreme Headquarters, Bergdorf and Meisel.
They went into Rommel's house and met with him quietly in his study. They explained that he had to make one of 2 terrible choices.
My father talked to me before he went away. The two generals, army generals, told him that there was enough evidence that he had been the part of the upheaval against Hitler. But Hitler, remembering his merits in North Africa, will give him a chance. The chance is to take poison.
The alternative was having his family sent to a concentration camp after Rommel's public court-martial and disgrace.
They also promised that his staff officers would escape, and then he decided to go with them and said, I have no choice and I will do the reasonable thing, not the dramatic thing.
Rommel climbed into a staff car with the two officers, and later that afternoon was reported dead of a stroke.
Rommel's funeral was heavily orchestrated by the Nazi Party. It was budgeted. It was a magnificent funeral. Rommel's casket was draped with his medals, including the Knight's Cross. A jeweled sword was there. His marshal's baton was also on top of the casket. The body was being watched over by officers with drawn swords. One of the songs that was sung by the congregation was I Once Had a Comrade, a lament, a ballad to honor a fallen German soldier. Hitler's wreath is brought in. It's so large you could barely get it through a huge doorway. The funeral oration, done by the oldest German Field Marshal von Rundstedt, had the central theme of unity of Germany against the Allies. And in that oration, von Rundstedt said that Rommel's heart was with the Fuhrer. He said that National Socialism was a cause that Rommel was heavily devoted to.
It is a horrible irony that Erwin Rommel was given the magnificent hero's funeral that he deserved by the very people who had murdered him. His magnificent career was splendidly commemorated by those who had so misused it. The huge crowds that lined the streets differed from these high officials in one important way. Their grief was genuine. Erwin Rommel's soldier was laid to rest in the village cemetery in Herrlingen. It planted back into the soil of a disgraced Germany at least one seed of honor and decency for a new flower.
Rommel was probably out of his age. He should have been in the 16th or 17th century, and Erwin Rommel might have been the last German knight.